Okay, and we are on the air, and this is the first in a experimental uh, conversation with some big authors. And today we have, for number one, we have Ian Reifowitz, author of The Tribalization of Politics. We also have, we both have our copies here. We also, and we're also going to call this word, kind of like Drunken History, we're going to call this Words with Whiskey. Now, I have my bottle of Nika Coffee, Japanese whiskey. Ian didn't have any whiskey, so he had to get wine. It's a damn good cat. So
damn good cat. Oh, you can read that from there. Okay.
I can read. Yeah, we have everything. So
good.
we'll have a little schmoozing, a little talking, a little chatting. So first, let's talk about Ian's book. Now, we released Ian's book last summer, like I think June of 2019. And Ian's book is basically about the tribalization of politics, how Rush Limbaugh, I'll read the subtitle, that explains a lot, how Rush Limbaugh's race-baiting rhetoric on the Obama presidency paved the way for Trump. Now, Ian is, I'm going to read Ian's bio, is professor of history at Empire State College, the SUNY State University of New York. He's also the author of Obama's America, a transformative vision of our national identity. He's also a contributing editor at Daily Kos, and his articles have appeared in the Daily News, Newsday, The Republic, and These Times, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So welcome, Ian.
Thank you.
Okay, and first, let's talk about the book. Now, basically, the thesis of the book is that, people think Donald Trump's racism kind of just, he's a racist, it kind of happened in a vacuum. He just got elected, he's racist, and it started. But this book actually goes all the way back to the beginning of the Obama presidency. So we're going back a dozen years, basically, and how basically Rush Limbaugh, the well-known conservative radio host, basically used this thing called racial priming against Obama to kind of whip his audience into a racial frenzy against the first African-American presidents, and how that kind of crossed over into Trump. So Ian, do you want to sort of take it from there?
Well said, actually, Robert.
Having read the book many times and edited, yes, I hope so.
You know it pretty well.
I hope so,
yeah, look, Limbaugh really tapped into something that was, and he's far from the only one, but I decided to look at Limbaugh, because he's got the biggest audience, right? And has had the biggest audience since talk radio audiences have been calculated, starting in the early 1990s. He's always had the biggest audience. It actually has come back up, even with with the election of Trump. It's back up to about 15.5 million unique listeners per week. And he has, always played on divisions in our society. But with the election of Obama, or even really with the emergence of Obama on the scene, he took the opportunity to connect Obama to some of the larger fears and anxieties built around race that his white conservative audience has. And that goes back decades, right? His audience is very familiar with people like Jesse Jackson and Al Sharpton, who were in the media, since the 80s. And it was very easy for Limbaugh to connect and, to connect Obama to these other figures, and then the newer figures like Reverend Wright, and then all other, Reverend Jeremiah Wright, who had been Obama's pastor, and other developments in the American society, in the media, Black Lives Matter, for example, to do one of the things he did was what I call really to blacken Limbaugh, blacken Obama, paint him as this kind of black radical, paint him as, a Black Panther, Malcolm X, anti-white, black nationalist. He also, in the book, I discuss, he tries to paint Obama in some ways as anti-American, in a way by defining Americanness or America as essentially equivalent to the interests of white Americans or conservative white Americans. So that if you're anti-white, you're anti-American. He hints at Obama being somehow pro-Muslim in a way that is also anti-American, or even possibly a secret Muslim, although, he loves to drop those sort of hints. So there's a lot of different ways in which essentially Limbaugh tries to paint Obama as the other. And what he's doing there is, rather than simply, trying to to explain why Obama's policies are wrong and Limbaugh's policies are right, it's much deeper than that. He wants to scare the white American people, really, about a coming, if not race war, at least a coming struggle among the races in which Black, Hispanic, Native American, Asian, to some degree, are on one side, along with their sort of dupes among the white progressive community, and the white Christians, right, are on the other side. And that's how you tribalize. That's how you tribalize politics. It goes from an argument over whether the capital gains rate should be, tax rate should be 18% or 24%, which is an argument people can have, or whatever, to a situation where people feel like Barack Obama is going to take from them and their families and give what they're taking from their families to undeserving Black and brown people, and that's how Limbaugh pitches it. And immigration is also a central part of that. Obama wants to open the floodgates of get rid of the border so that more Hispanic people can come in, whether they're legal or, as Limbaugh would call them, illegal, right, undocumented. And down the road, Obama's going to give them the right to vote so that they can continue to vote for Democratic candidates. And all this really is about a fear, or playing on a fear that some white people have, unfortunately, that if and when white people become in some ways a minority, that they will be then oppressed in a society where the dominant groups are, instead of white people, are now Black and Latino people and their allies in the white community. And so all this fear is very motivating, unfortunately, to people who are inclined to be afraid. And Limbaugh is very well aware of this. He gets people to listen to his show and get worked up, gets their adrenaline going, gets the serotonin flowing, and then they want to come back the next day to listen to the show again.
And I want to talk about, right? I want to talk a little about his listeners, because I do have family members, who are longtime Rush Limbaugh listeners, and I know the age of his audience tends to skew much older. So I would assume, it's interesting when you mentioned people like Jesse Jackson before. I mean, to like a lot of people, it's like they might know him. Oh, he's a guy in the news sometimes, but they don't know, that he ran president. I mean, they don't know a lot of his history. So I assume with Limbaugh, he's had a lot of the same audience for these people listening to him for 30 years. So there's a logical progression from like Jesse Jackson to Reverend Wright. So he can say these names and Jesse Jackson, sort of in isolation, I guess, and that doesn't mean anything, but these are kind of whistles he's been playing, blowing for his audience for 30 years. So it's just kind of a continuation. We go from Jesse Jackson, we go to Reverend Wright, we go to Obama, and just keep adding people on here and there when they fit the narrative. No,
you're exactly right, Robert. And also remember, Obama was started his term in 2009, so that was even already, that's now a dozen years ago, as you said. So Jesse Jackson was even his heyday was even closer, or less further in the past at that time. But that's what Limbaugh does. He plants those seeds. He talks about those people that he wants to talk about over and over again, so that when something comes up with Obama, all he has to say is Jesse Jackson. He doesn't have to say Jesse Jackson, the guy who blah 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 blah, in which case his audience would go to sleep. They don't have to, because probably Limbaugh didn't go 2 weeks without mentioning Jesse Jackson over the previous 35 years. So there's no way. And this is another sort of, I think, tactic of Limbaugh's. He's a very talented broadcaster. That's probably the only nice thing I'll say about him. But what he does is he rewards repeat listeners. He doesn't say Jesse Jackson, who blah 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 blah, or for the benefit of benefit of you listening for the first time, blah 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 blah. No, he doesn't do that. He makes the listeners have to do a little digging themselves, maybe, but the repeat listener feels like they're part of a club, because they know not just who Jesse Jackson is. But
whiskey, we never know when we're going to be interrupted. This is Everett, my older son. So
I have
Godzilla show. No,
we're not good. We've been watching a lot of Godzilla movies. The ones from the 60s. So that's been our pandemic theme for the last 24 to 48 hours.
I'm not a real Godzilla connoisseur. I can't.
It's hard to watch for more than 10 minutes if you're over the age of 10. But he's the right age for it.
Perfect.
Anyway, Godzilla to Rush, which is probably not much of a stretch anyway, but
fine. Yeah. So anyway, so that's one of the things I looked at in the book. Really, Reverend Wright, who you mentioned a couple of times, is crucial for Obama. And so what Limbaugh would, by talking about Reverend Wright deeply early on in 2008 and 2009, he could then come back to Reverend Wright anytime he wanted to. So in 2015, if he's talking about some issue with foreign policy, he could just say, and like Reverend Wright said, the chickens are coming home to roost, and his audience knows exactly who Reverend Wright is. It rewards the listeners, and it reminds them that they should be scared about Barack Obama because they know that they're scared about Reverend Wright. And so that's the kind of tactic that he uses, Limbaugh, to keep the listeners engaged, to reward repeat listeners. It's almost like a soap opera. You know the characters, and so you keep coming back to hear what's going to happen with them next. And he gives everybody a nickname. All the things that Trump does now, Limbaugh, was doing years before him. And it's funny if you think about it, right? I mentioned this book, but soap operas began on the radio, right? And so Limbaugh is in some ways just carrying on that tradition. And we could talk about this if you want, but certainly the parallels between what Limbaugh did, and that's why I say that he paved the way for Trump, and what Trump does are very striking on many of these issues, and especially on immigration.
Yeah, I say because we can definitely talk about Trump. I mean, how much of it is? Do you think Trump picked up a lot of his act, quote unquote, from Limbaugh? It was just sort of a natural. Trump was doing what Limbaugh was doing, and they kind of found each other.
So there was some reporting on this, which I came across, I think, after we sent the book to print. And there was I want to say it was in Vanity Fair, honestly, I wish I could remember, but it was a report that looked at how Trump and his very, very small staff, because there was really Trump and 3 guys, in 2015, had been listening a lot to talk radio, conservative talk radio, Limbaugh and others, to get a sense of what conservative, the conservative grassroots, if you want to look at it that way, was interested in. And they definitely picked up on one of the things Limbaugh talked a lot about, which was immigration. He slammed Obama on immigration. There was the Comprehensive Immigration Reform Act that was passed by the Senate in 2013 and then ultimately shot down in a Republican House. Limbaugh led the charge against it from the right, and to some degree, this the racism within the Tea Party movement, as documented by a number of scholars, also relates to immigration. They don't want the country to get any less white, and so that all connects back to Limbaugh. And so, as Trump is sort of developing his plans in 2015, there's documentation. Sorry, there's a phone call coming in. It's probably a robocall.
I was not a fire. I was worried it was a fire.
There's actually it's somebody I don't recognize, so let's assume it's a robocall.
Probably Rush. It's probably Rush. Your daily checking.
He knows what we're doing. He always knows. He's omnipotent.
He knows. Though he can't hear and he's dying of cancer, he knows.
Anyway, so apparently, the story of Trump's speech when he announced for president, coming down the escalator at Trump Tower, he had a fairly sort of anodyne speech written for him by his guys. But all of this study of right-wing talk radio and immigration apparently popped into his head, and he ad-libbed this whole section about Mexican immigrants, people coming in from Mexico being, supposedly being rapists and drug dealers and murderers. And that wasn't even in his speech, but clearly it was on his mind. And
was that where he actually first, was that the first time Trump actually said all that stuff? Was actually, in a coherent speech, was actually when he,
I'm trying to remember if he ever, I don't think that was the first time he'd ever talked about it. But it wasn't something he talked about certainly in the 1990s or the 2000s, even back when Trump was already, showing his, using racist rhetoric, talk about things like the Central Park Five, the young kids who were wrongly ultimately accused and convicted. Anyway, he had all kinds of terrible racial language back, but he didn't talk about immigration. Look, he was a rich guy who hired undocumented immigrants to clean his hotels. That wasn't where he was at. He certainly wasn't going into that kind of politics. And even a little bit of an aside, in 2012, when Trump was flirting with the Republican, running for the Republican nomination, Limbaugh was not that excited about it because he saw him as not that conservative on issues like abortion and things that really mattered. But he liked what Trump was doing because he liked Trump's birtherism and his attacks. He saw him as somebody who was willing to, get angry and yell and scream at President Obama. Anyway, but on the immigration stuff, clearly he recognized that the kind of language that Limbaugh was using, about talking about sovereignty, our borders, talking about America. Limbaugh talked about demographic change. America's not going to be the same white America anymore, and Obama wants to change what the country looks like and what the country is. I mean, this is the kind of language that Trump used once he took office. It's the kind of language you saw on Fox News as well. That, there was Tucker Carlson and Laura Ingraham. There was a period where they were both going repeatedly down this path and talking about cultural change and demographic change being a bad thing for America. This is something that, I think Trump saw Limbaugh doing and getting big ratings. We all know how Trump feels about ratings, and went with it. Okay, yeah.
It's and the interesting thing about it is, and I believe it was Marcos who did the forward for the book. I believe he said that, because the way you the basis for this book was you listening to. Well, did you listen to? Did you read the? You read the transcripts, right?
Yes. I don't think I could have subjected myself to listening to 8 years of Limbaugh.
So all Russia's transcripts are free online. So you read basically 8 years of or whatever of the transcripts. That must have been. I'm surprised you don't have a lot of whiskey in your around you and everything like that, because it would Hold on, I gotta turn a phone call down. Okay, sorry. And but you went through all these years and years, and what made you because obviously that's not fun research. So what made you what made you want to write this book? What kind of what was the first inklings that this is an interesting idea, this is something that should be written about?
Right. So I had written the Obama's America book, which you mentioned, and I was thinking about wanting to write another book. I had done so much research for the Obama book. Most of it was about Obama's ideas. That was, as the title suggests, it was about Obama's conception of American national identity. But I had a chapter late in the book where I looked at critics of Obama, mostly from his right, although a handful from his left, who attacked his inclusive conception of American national identity. That book was had sort of a positive energy to it because I was writing about a person's ideas that I respected and that I could, identify with. But there was kind of a dark energy I fed off of in working on that other chapter. And I said, it might be interesting to, now that the Obama presidency is winding down, sort of revisit that and look at the full scope of, and essentially look at how the right-wing media covered the Obama presidency.
Okay.
And I didn't want to sort of, I needed a way in. I needed a way of doing this. I'm a historian. I do come from an academic background, so I want to look at sources in a comprehensive way, and I want to be able to, I don't want to be anybody to realize, oh, you cherry picked, you did this and that and the other. There's no way to look at the right-wing media. There's an infinite number of words, spoken and written. So I said, well, you know what? Limbaugh was the first name I even thought of. Limbaugh was one of the people I looked at most closely in the other book, and I said, why don't I? Maybe I could just do Limbaugh. And with 30 seconds of Googling, I got to rushlimbaugh.com and I saw the transcripts were there. And I said, well, there you go. I'll use him as a case study, right? He's the biggest and baddest of them all, so to speak. And I knew he would cover every major event of the Obama presidency and every major theme and policy. And so I thought, let's do it this way. And it'll be essentially a comprehensive, I don't even want to say narrow, but directed but comprehensive look at one source. And I was able to read the transcripts. It was provided, on his website, so that worked out well. And once I got started, I could see that there was a lot going on there, and obviously I had to narrow it to some degree. I couldn't, and there was really two things I honed in on. One was the lies, and the lies were extensive and on every policy issue, and then the other was the race baiting. And so I decided that the most productive way to look at it would be to look at the race baiting, because it really stood out. I mean, and his tactics stood out. And once when I started out, there was no Trump, or there really wasn't much of a Trump phenomenon. But when I saw the Trump phenomenon playing out, I could see those connections, and I felt like that was a really useful way to approach what I had found Limbaugh doing, and because it allowed me to connect it, not just to be a look backwards, but also a look forwards as well.
And it's interesting you mentioned lies, because you talk about it in the book how, Limbaugh lies, but he does it in such a way that he can almost deny that he really said anything. It's a very interesting, he's a master at it, but he doesn't come out and it says it in such a way that when you try to pin him down, he didn't really say that, or it's like,
Right. He does that in particular when he's doing something that he knows is sort of crossing a line. Even more than just sort of straight up lying, because there were things that he just straight up lied about in terms of like facts and figures. But in terms of crossing a line, like he would never come out and say, Obama's a Muslim.
Yeah.
Right. And he would never say Obama was born in Kenya. But he'd walk right up to that line. Right. And he'd say, well, people are wondering if, and, hey, he never seems to, deny, or I don't have all these things memorized, obviously, but it was a very clever thing. I sort of, and one of his favorites was that if he did get called out on something, he would say, I was essentially say, I was just kidding. I was just tweaking you guys. I was tweaking the media, and we literally saw Trump do that within the last few days
with the disinfectant. I was joking. Yeah.
I was just being sarcastic, to try to get a rise out of you guys. I mean, literally, that's right out of Limbaugh's playbook. And I don't know that Limbaugh invented it, but certainly I wouldn't be surprised if Limbaugh, gave him a private phone call and just say, hey, you were being say that you were being sarcastic. And no, of course, Trump didn't say, hey, everybody, at 5 p.m., let's all inject bleach. No, he didn't say it. But he suggested that it might be something worth investigating as a medical treatment. Well, that's bad enough. That's terrible. How can you suggest something like, well, the next day when you just say, I was kidding, you're the fool for taking me seriously. I mean, that's literally, No,
and it's funny. I didn't, when I first heard about it, I looked at it and I was just like, I didn't think it would be such a big deal what Trump said, because I figured he said in his, we can look into, he didn't say it like, you should all go out. I mean, so I was surprised almost that the media picked it up and it became such a, he's telling people to, inject bleach or whatever, because he said it in a very, very rush kind of like, we should look into it. He said it almost in a, unfortunately he's not as smooth as Rush in doing this.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and the other thing is that, see, the people in the media didn't accuse him of telling people to inject the bleach. They said he floated the idea that it could be a treatment, but then the right-wing extremists like Limbaugh said, they said he said to inject the bleach. They're lying to you again. So this was another thing Limbaugh would love to do, is attack the credibility of the media by attributing things to them that they didn't say. The left-wing media said Trump told you to inject it, and he didn't say that. Well, A, no, he didn't say it, and B, no, the media didn't say he said to inject it. But they were very careful about saying explaining what he said. He floated a possibility that this could work as a treatment. That's bad enough. We don't need that from our frickin' president, do we? I mean, come on. Could you imagine Obama doing something like that?
I don't have my bottle. I just have whiskey. I don't have my bottle of my bleach. It's all empty. We've been using it for days. But we just have a few more minutes. I wanted to, do you still follow Rush? So I'm curious, so what's the thing now that Rush is going to do in the fall? What's the anti-Biden thing that we can look forward to?
Right. I will admit that I no longer go through Russia's transcripts.
You're not hooked? I thought you were hooked for life. No?
Maybe that can be another book. We can talk about that on the Trump presidency. But for now, no, I'm not. A couple of times I've gone in when something has come up, but to some degree, if you want to know what Rush is saying, just listen to Trump.
Okay.
Right. And so whatever Trump says, Rush wants to echo it. The only time I saw them even slightly disconnecting was when, and I did talk about this a little bit in the book, there was, the government shutdown in, must have been late 2018 over immigration.
Yeah.
And the wall. And there was a point where the Senate was going to pass a bill without new funding for the wall. And Trump had said he would sign it. And Limbaugh said, don't sign it, Trump. He said, the American people want the wall, which of course means conservatives want the wall. And
even said, I think Limbaugh even said you'll lose, you will lose your base if you do.
You'll lose your base.
You mean you'll lose me, basically? Yeah.
Exactly. So I think that that's sort of the one thing where you can see Limbaugh making sure that Trump stays in the Limbaugh Trump, stays as the Limbaugh Trump and not some other kind of Trump. But other than that, all he basically does is defend and echo what Trump has to say, which is why he got the Medal of Freedom, which just galls, I think, any right-thinking person. That he's shared. He's on a list of people that includes Rosa Parks and Mother Teresa and Donald Trump.
Yeah.
I mean, excuse me, Rush Limbaugh.
Yeah, okay. Just another thing. So, what do you? Just a couple of, I guess, unrelated, unrelated things. So, what do you? Because we're talking about politics here. So, what's your take on Joe Biden? We're actually taping this on a Friday, May 1st. So, and this morning, Joe Biden was on MSNBC and blah blah, and he did, not unsurprisingly denied the allegations. What do you make of the Tara Reade allegations? How do you think? Do you think it's going to matter? I mean, because obviously, there's a big split, where people think, she's not credible. People think he definitely did it. So how do you think it's going to first of all, what do you think about the accusation? Second of all, how do you think it will play out? Right.
I mean, I've been following the story. Yesterday in the USA Today, there was a long, frankly, takedown written by a guy named Michael J. Stern, who is a former federal prosecutor, apparently for 25 years. And he really laid out point by point significant weaknesses in Reade's accusations. And I actually did a little post for that about summarizing that on Daily Kos yesterday. At the end of the day, we want to take any accusation seriously, of sexual harassment and especially of sexual assault. This one, and by taking it seriously, that means assessing the facts, seriously. It means not dismissing it. Reading the Stern piece and some other things that I've written, there are enough significant problems with her accusation that I am not willing to say Joe Biden is not an acceptable Democratic nominee. There are so many problems, people can read the Stern piece or plenty of other things out there. There are enough inconsistencies, without even going into the weird sort of Putin praise, and even the Bernie stuff. Forgetting about that, just the things that she said she did, the people that she said she spoke to, who are high-level staffers in Biden's office who say no, this didn't happen. Not like, oh, I don't remember. No, this didn't happen. There was the woman who was a manager in Biden's office says, listen, I'm a woman, I'm a professional. It would be seared in my memory if this person or any person had come to me and said, Joe Biden did this. Mm-hmm. Reade says, I went to this person and this person and this person, and all three of them, including that woman, said that did not happen. She did not come to me. So I don't want to go into too much there. I don't see how in a campaign where the guy on the other side has had 20 some odd sexual assault accusations leveled against him,
but he's proud of that.
I don't see how one on the other side is going to have much of an impact, but you never know. You never know. I mean, in some ways, she's a perfect storm. She's got the sort of the Bernie thing and the Russia thing. There are people, look at the fact that Jill Stein essentially took away enough votes to elect Trump president. So in a close election, everything matters. This is not going to force Biden out of the race unless there are new developments and another accusation, another serious accusation with more corroboration. Who knows? But for right now, I think Biden, by calling for transparency, that was important. Calling for those records to be released, he can contrast himself to Trump, who doesn't release any records of anything. And it was smart that Biden said, I've never had anybody sign a non-disclosure agreement because, that's what tripped up Bloomberg in his 5 minutes, on the debate stage with Elizabeth Warren. So far, I think Biden is okay, but obviously, ask me again tomorrow.
We could do this again tomorrow. We could have a daily meeting. Okay, well, this was great. I think this went well. I said for our first attempt. Now, again, Ian's book, Tribalization of Politics. It is available wherever books are available, which in this day and age is not the it's not as simple, but it's available. You know, Amazon, bookshop.org is a great place if you want to go buy books. It supports independent bookstores, so it's you know, that's a great place if you want to get it actually through an indie and support them, and they really need a lot of help in this, you know, with what's going on right now. And I want to thank Ian for being our guest. I want to thank Nika Coffee. Whiskey. Oh, yeah, I'll take one sip because otherwise it's not anything. Okay. Mm-hmm. Very smooth. It's very Japanese whiskeys are the best. Okay. Well,
To your good health, Robert.
to my good, yes, good health. All right. Well, thank you, Ian, very much. And again, Tribalization of Politics is the book, and look for it anywhere. And Ian is a front pager on Daily Kos. And what it's like what, every Sunday? That's every Sunday you do it, or
we've shifted away from every Sunday. It's just most weeks. But it's not on a given day anymore. They've shifted our structure a little bit.
Okay, so you can't go to church and then come home and read.
Sadly, no.
No. Okay, well, you know, if you look on Daily Kos, please look out for Ian's column, and you know, stuff gets picked up on Alternate and everything like that. He's a good guy to follow, and again, this is a very, you know, important if you really want to understand kind of how Trump and his racism, how we got it, read this book. Okay, Ian, thank you very much, okay?
Thank you, Robert.
Have a good day.
Only 1%.